Hi, I'm your host, Marsha Florence with Just Ask. Today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is End of Life Caring. Hurry back and join us. Hi, I'm your host, Marsha Florence with Just Ask. Today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is End of Life Caring, and we have with us elder law attorney Sue Fabian. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much.
It's been a while.
A very long time.
Yes. We're always welcome to see you. Now, Sue, this is a very touching and meaningful subject for us today, and the title of the show is End of Life Caring. Before we go into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
As an elder law attorney,
Yes, ma'am.
elder law attorneys help primarily adult children of older adults, and less often an older adult who actually walks through our door at points of crisis. The older adult could have fallen, broken a hip, had a stroke, is suffering from some progressive irreversible dementia, oftentimes Alzheimer's, and none of the legal foundation has been laid in the circumstance. There's no medical power of attorney, no financial power of attorney. How is this care going to be financed? We have to look at Medicare issues, Medicaid issues, sometimes it's guardianship and conservatorship, and then after the older adult passes, sometimes it means probate. So it's pretty broad.
Mm-hmm.
The spectrum of what we do is pretty broad. It's not specialized like criminal law would be, or personal injury, where you have a very discrete body of law that you look at. In elder law, it runs the gamut of whatever the needs are of the older adult. It's no one particular area of law.
Now, has elder law been in existence only so many years? Because it doesn't sound like it has a history of more than a span of like the last 10 or 15 years or so.
Elder law arose somewhere in the mid-1980s as a distinct specialty at the same time that geriatric care management did. And I don't know the exact etiology of how that evolved. But I stumbled into it because of personal circumstances when I found out about geriatric care management. And I enlisted the aid of one, and from there evolved my own personal journey into geriatric care management and elder law.
Now, I took a liking to it more or less as a class when I was in college, and then I ended up getting a degree in gerontology. So as I ventured into it as a degree, and my parents became of age, as well as I was working and doing my internship in a nursing facility, it became important to me to understand the change of life as it comes about, and to know that, one day I will be faced with some of these various challenges, and this is what it is. So I take it, to a point that elder law and the study of gerontology and everything evolves around one another, so that you can prepare yourself to care for your loved one, as well as you understand the laws and the rules and regulations for being a caregiver of an elderly person.
What I found out in both my personal journey and subsequently in working with scores of clients is that elder law and geriatric care management always dovetail. You can't have one without the other. And oftentimes when you see an elder law attorney, that attorney will bring on board a geriatric care manager to do part of the assessment of what this picture is really looking like. Because until you know how this situation may track with the older adult, it's a lot harder to plan legally. And so when you have that knowledge, you have more of a focused approach as an elder law attorney I happen to wear both hats. I started out as a geriatric care manager and then went to law school later in life.
Okay. All right. Now, do you think that by chance, is there such thing as that if a parent feels that they're being mistreated by their adult children, they can request the assistance of an elder attorney?
They can, but oftentimes it's very hard to do because part of the mistreatment oftentimes involves isolation of the older adult. And so their ability to reach out is often very compromised. And we as people working with older adults, when their adult children come in, that's part of what we have to be mindful about. We have to kind of read into the situation.
So if a parent says, well, I'm being mistreated by my son, it has to be an investigation of some sort.
If we have suspicion of that and evidence of that, oftentimes we would turn to Adult Protective Services to launch an investigation. But, you know, that doesn't happen very often.
Right. It's just it seems that over the years, if you have Child Protective Services, you have Adult Protective Services.
Right.
So, you know, the seniors feel like, my children are trying to put me away. So before they put me away, I want you to investigate this to make sure. Or if they understand that they're getting out from their home, are they prepared? But I know that that's a struggle because it could be of a mental illness that, you know, precludes them to have to be moved from the home in the first place.
Right. You've opened up a whole can of worms.
Right. So it's
I've been to, you know, I've been to an elder's home where the individual was saying, there's people in my attic. And certainly that is a hallmark symptom of some of the dementias that older adults suffer from. They often call the police. So that trademark symptom of suspicion often goes hand in hand with the medical condition that the older adult is suffering. So when you're an elder law attorney, you really have to look at all of that. You know, we're not doctors, we're not neuropsychologists, we're not trained in doing full-blown capacity assessments, but we certainly have to know where those resources are and pull them into the picture when we think appropriate.
Okay. Well, so we're going to take a break, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with some more vital information about caring for your loved ones. We'll be right back.
For those dealing with the daily struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. That's why AARP created a community with experts and other caregivers to help us better care for ourselves and the ones we love.
And welcome back to the show. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just not joining us, we have with us Sue Fabian, elder law attorney. And today's subject, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very touchy. So if you're listening or watching and everything, you may want to take some notes. In the process, if you are preparing for the passing of a loved one, whether it's an elderly person or a young person, you have some questions, we'd like to ask you to give us a call at our 800 number, 323-5336, 1-800-323-5336. Maybe Sue Fabian can help you with a question or two in reference to preparations. Sue, I wanted to go into some things about caring for your loved one in their passing. What's the difference between hospice at home and hospice care at the hospital?
Hospice goes, first of all, wherever the patient is. Hospice can be in a standalone facility where the hospice is housed in its own building, or the hospice personnel, the doctors and nurses, the aides, can go to where the patient is. That could be in the home, it could be in assisted living, it could be in a nursing home, and in a very limited sense, if the patient's symptoms cannot be controlled by the hospice in the setting where they are, or if death is absolutely imminent, then they would qualify for care within the hospital in their hospice unit. I know of some hospitals that have that. I don't know if all hospitals in the area have that, but it's very individualized, focused care at that point for the actively dying individual.
Okay, so by rights, can a patient or family members ask in the hospital if they have such availability, or that's just something that the doctors may discuss with the family, that the person could be moved over to this wing for hospice care?
If you're already in the hospital, usually there's a social worker attached to the care team.
Yes.
And that social worker is oftentimes a hospital discharge planner, but they are social workers. They should be able to help the families sort through that, whether medical care is becoming futile on the medical units, or if that patient needs to be moved into palliative care or hospice. It's palliative care is kind of between hospice and traditional aggressive medical treatment. Palliative care has much more limited treatment protocols, and if it becomes to a point where in palliative care the patient is dying, then they can be moved to the hospice ward of the hospital.
Now I'm going to ask you, so the word palliative care, what does that mean precisely? Some of our viewers are probably trying to figure that out. So what is palliative care? I know you said
palliative care has a lot of overlap with hospice care.
Okay.
But palliative care, if you're in palliative care, some things can continue to be done, like blood transfusion. There are other, I don't know it chapter and verse, but there are certain limited medical treatment procedures that can still happen under palliative care, but not under hospice care. And I know that blood transfusion is one of them.
But when families are making that decision, is it a family's decision to admit their loved one under hospice, or is that the person themselves? I mean, do you have any?
That's a really good question. If you're in the hospital, there are very narrow criteria for admission into the hospice in the hospital, and that's a medical decision. That's by the attending physician. The family can certainly ask for it, and then see if their loved one qualifies. If they don't, then the next best thing to be aware of is palliative care, where it's mostly symptom control with some limited medical treatment intervention. But it's more about keeping the patient comfortable and improving their quality of life, and not necessarily the quantity of life in terms of duration of days.
Wow, okay. What about when they have the home care of hospice? Is it when the nurses and the doctors come and visit, weekly or frequently, to see what level is the person at? I mean,
the
I experienced something like that.
The doctor will initially see the patient and understand what the needs of that situation are, and then nurses will come out there as often as the treatment plan has indicated the need, or if the needs of the patient change, that'll alter the care plan. Personal care aides are part of that picture as well. So it depends on what's going on with the individual and what their needs are. I might also add that hospice services, the breadth and the depth of their service can vary according to setting. Hospice in a nursing home setting can look very different than a hospice care in an assisted living setting. Assisted living, there's no 24-hour nursing on board. And so the interface in between the hospice nurse and the facility nurse is much more limited. And there's a lot less coordination of service, and a lot of things can fall through the gaps. So depending on the setting that you're at, it's in the admissions person of the hospice entity should lay all of that out for you. It wasn't laid out for me, and I in particular encountered some pretty brutal circumstances because of that lack of coordination with regard to my mother.
Okay.
And I discovered it the hard way. That's why I'm putting it out there now.
I'm under the impression that they probably never come together. I mean, you had to experience it yourself, and I appreciate you sharing your understanding of it with our viewers, because someone else is going to come across that and they're not going to know what to do or what to expect. Is it by rights that they just don't collaborate, or?
Well, let me give you some specific examples.
Okay.
I don't know how else to explain it than by example. My mother had already been in hospice as of July of 2012, and everything was status quo. She was being maintained. Then in early October, there was a virus going around this assisted living facility, and my mom acquired that. That caused her to feel like she had a very bad cold.
Mm-hmm.
That caused her not to eat. And at one point, just a couple of days into this experience, my brother, who relieved me, he came in after work. I sat by my mom all day. Called me up at 8 o'clock on a Friday night and said, "Mom is unresponsive." I'd been with her all day, and she clearly wasn't feeling good, and she was in bad shape. But I knew she didn't want to go to the hospital. I elevated hospice care. I thought everything was fine. And so I immediately went back up there and took one look at her and had a very good idea of what was going on. I tested her blood sugar, and it had dropped to 65.
Mm-hmm.
She would not have survived the night because of what I consider an incredible lapse of care. She hadn't eaten in a couple days, and the facility kept giving her diabetic medication, which further drove down blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was entering a diabetic coma in that case. I pumped her full of sugar in her mouth. She was conscious enough to swallow, and she revived. Now, I shouldn't have had to have been in that position. I am a non-medical person literally saving her life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I have to say as an aside, people might ask me, well, she was in hospice anyway.
Right.
You know, and my reply to that is, but the 2 weeks that she lived, because of that, the 2 additional weeks, allowed my outstate brother to come in
Mm-hmm.
and say goodbye to her.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an incredible gift to both of them.
Right. So by rights, we need to be prepared to know that there should be a combination of individuals in the hospice setting that should come together to do the plan of action, so that one won't drop the ball.
No one was monitoring her vitals.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm under the impression, Sue, that, you know, because, like you said, she's already in the facility, the people just kind of get too relaxed on those issues. And
well, I don't know, you know, I can't speak for the facility or for the hospice nurse and how that breakdown happened.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that they talked because the hospice nurse had to get what medication she was on. But what I didn't know is that neither one of them had talked about ongoing monitoring, and no one told me.
Okay.
I mean, I'm in there every day monitoring her blood just because I think it's a good thing to do. But that several days went by that she wasn't eating, which of itself drives down blood sugar. And then to be getting diabetic medication on top of that to further drive down blood sugar, could have been fatal.
Yeah.
Now, I knew she was going to die, but I really couldn't handle her dying because of a mistake like that.
Okay. Let's go to a break, and we'll be right back.
Do you know that stroke targets by color? Odds are, if you're African American, you're twice as likely to suffer a stroke as white Americans. Know where you stand, because beating the odds isn't about winning, it's about living. Join the power to end stroke at strokeassociation.org.
Come here. I love you, Dad.
And welcome back to the last half of the show. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very touching show, and I'm sure some of you have questions you want to ask us. Please feel free to go to all our social media network, which could be Facebook, Just As Talk Show, Twitter, hashtag Just As Talk Show, or please feel free to give us a call, 1-800-323-5336, and those who like to email me, Marsha at Just As Talk Show. So if you just got a group of questions you want to ask myself, Sue, Fabian, or any other of our past guests, you have all of our social media. Feel free to use that. Now, this is a very emotional piece for Sue. We do understand, and my condolences go out to you. I just want you to know that I have you here today, Sue, because not only are you an elder care lawyer, but you shed light on the fact that people are not prepared for when their loved ones are about to leave. And I had a question about what is anticipatory grief?
Our society really isn't very good about talking on this topic, either individually about ourselves or about another person. And for many years I was anticipating the death of my mother. We've forged such an incredibly deep relationship over the years. I had been her sole caregiver for 22 years subsequent to her stroke. And the thought of life without Mom, just, I couldn't compute it in my brain. And it didn't feel good. And so I started reading a lot. And there is a key search term called anticipatory grief. And there's more and more material out about it. And so I began reading that. And sometimes I would get the oddest reactions from people, like, well, she isn't dead yet. What's your problem? And there was a total lack of understanding of when you're so close to someone, in thinking about that horizon of life for your loved one, what that does to a person inside. And so I found great comfort and usefulness in reading this material on anticipatory grief. What I found after her passing is that work that I did in anticipatory grief laid like a railroad track in my psyche of how to proceed in life without her. And I was surprised about that. That work that I had done actually has helped me and move through the grief of her passing now. And I wanted to call attention to that, to let people know there is such a concept, and there's research out there on that.
So is it a book or is it a manual? What is it?
There are books on it. There are a lot of articles about it. You just have to really do an online search to get the hits on
So whole word, anticipatory grief.
Grief, right.
And is that to help a person who is non-prepared for their loved one to pass on, but when you are at that point, you can read and see clarity about how you're going to be after their passing? Is that what that mainly is?
No, it's more of an awareness and an acknowledgement of all that's going on inside of you. It gives your experience validity, that you're not crazy, that you're not falling apart. That it's a phenomenon that people go through. Just like the grief process after the death, there's an anticipatory grief process before the death. But we don't talk about that. As a society and as a people, we really don't talk about it. We don't deal well with it.
Now, with that anticipatory grief part, would that be accountable for young or old? I mean, you could have a family member or person who's passing from, say, cancer or something.
Sure.
So that would apply to any of those natures? It doesn't have to be because it's of an elderly nature?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure our viewers are wanting, look it up, anticipatory grief, because some people have family members that, you don't have to be of age, but they are sick for whatever reason, and this day-to-day thing about waking up and finding them, non-responsive has taken its toll on them.
Absolutely.
Or that the person themselves know that they're passing.
Absolutely.
And they're trying to prepare their families to go on without them. Would that information apply to both parties, the person who's passing as well as the
if you have knowledge that the person is going to die, and you know, most people have a lot of feelings around that, this kind of material I think would be very helpful.
Okay, all right. It sounds, I mean, it sounds interesting, and I definitely want to read up on it and stuff, because if you are caring for an elderly person, 9 times out of 10, ladies and gentlemen, you are not preparing for their passing, but you don't have to find yourself at a loss. That's what I'm thinking. People find themselves at a loss now. Now what do I do?
Or alone.
Right, right. You know, and I know in my father's passing, it was a very rough ride, and you know, still blessed to have my mom. But you're right. When we are when we're the caregivers, there is a level of thought that somebody's going to be sick. Somebody might pass through the night. What if they slip and fall? What if they stop breathing? All those kind of things come up in the column of what if.
I might mention a couple of references that come to mind. There is a, I don't remember her first name, but the last name is Rando, R-A-N-D-O. She did a whole very scholarly work in anticipatory grief. And Gail Sheehy of Passages, her most recent book was about her experience in this ride with a loved one through progressive illness leading to death, and all that she anticipated and then experienced after the death, that I thought was very good.
Okay, okay. We're going to have that material looked up for our viewers. Well, Sue, it's always a pleasure to see you. I hope you come back and join us, and we appreciate you coming out today to share with us this helpful information, and once again, our hearts go out to you and yours. Okay.
Well, thank you. There's just so much more I could share, so yeah, I'd like to come back.
I would love to have you back.
Thank
Well,
you.
ladies and gentlemen, you know, as I always say, that we try to provide for you information that we think is helpful, and it doesn't always have to be about a person with a disability, and it doesn't have to always be about an elderly person. It's just general stuff that you don't read about, think about, or even come in contact with. So if you have a question, or if you better yet wanted to ask me a question or email me about a subject matter, please feel free to use all our social media, which I already told you: Facebook, Just As Talk Show, hashtag Just As Talk Show, the website www.justastalkshow.org, or 1-800-323-5336. I'm your host, Marsha Florence, for Just Ask. What do I always say? If you know someone with a disability, or if you just have a general question, don't be afraid to ask. Just ask. Thank you.